Hi, everyone. I thought I would do an episode on guess what? How to handle debt and money in the Bible. This episode one is not going to be about our personal obligations in that regard, but on our nation, the United States, or wherever we live throughout the world. What is our obligation? What did God tell Israel to do? Now, we're also going to take a look at the book written in 2012 while President Obama was still president. And a very humorous book was written called Obama's Prophet. And this was to be, it's a hypothetical story of a person who is a prophet. Prophet Hosea comes back in our time and starts advising President Obama about how to help rein in the national debt of the United States. And, but it's meant in a positive way. It's not a negative thing. He's trying to be helpful. And then another person comes along, and it's Mr. Duran Davis himself, the author of this book, who helped advise Hosea in this. So it's all kind of meant tongue in cheek, but to teach us some economics from a biblical standpoint. And you'll see there's some interesting passages in the Bible about using objects, rocks, and other things for currency in basically things you could easily manufacture. They weren't expensive. And that is how Egypt collapsed. And that's why they had 7 years of famine and so on and so forth. So we'll go through that. And I think you'll find it fun and entertaining. But I'm going to throw a couple of videos at you about what's going on in the real world as we go. So let's just study a little bit about this author. Duran Lowell Davis is the former CEO of the American Dollar Exchange and editor of their precious metals publication. He studied under German economist Lawrence Laudenbach, who immigrated to America as Hitler was rising to power. A well-traveled speaker, Davis promotes the nationalization of the Federal Reserve and a return to a constitutional currency. What does he mean by nationalization of the Federal Reserve? Most people think the Federal Reserve belongs to the United States government. No, it does not. It's technically a private entity. It has a lot of statutory oversight from the U.S. Congress because that's the way it was set up, but it's technically still a private bank. And what it does, it's allowed to synthesize money loans through subsidiary banks. You learn this when you go to corporate law class, how it operates. And basically, it's been varied what the ratio is from time to time, but there's a ratio that it can actually allow an amount that for every dollar you deposit in your bank, they can loan your dollar out so many times. They can loan it out. I think currently it's 6. At one point in history it was 12. It led to a banking crisis and collapse of our economy and the depression, all these things. So they learned some lessons over time. And I think it's now a ratio of 6 for every dollar you put in there. And that leads to bank runs. There's no money there because the money's been loaned out to somebody else. And the movie Wonderful Life, if you've ever watched it, the banker's trying to explain that's the person who wants to kill himself because everybody's running on the bank. And he tries to say, the money that you gave me is in this other person's house and so on. He's trying to explain, I don't have any money, but we have nothing here. And people going, it's a bank. Why can't I get money out of the bank? Well, we don't have the money is what he's trying to explain. So anyway, that's how the Federal Reserve works. It involves a system of basically authorizing issuance of digital currency on the bank's ledger. It can actually, for every dollar you put in there, it can loan it out so many times. I think it's 6. And that's how they make money. Because if they can loan out your dollar at, let's say, 6.5% interest, but they can do it 6 times. How much money are they making every dollar? Multiply 6 times 6, that's 36. They're making 36% interest on every dollar you put in there, if that's the ratio. When it was 13 times, so the reserves didn't have to be very high, they could be very low, and they could loan out your money 13 times, and they would make that same 6% times 13. Now you're talking about big money. That's 72%. Do you see what the whole way it works? So our whole system depends upon a digital and paper currency. Paper currency is the physical money, and then this synthetic dollars that was allowed by law to allow the Federal Reserve to make these deposits or allow these banks to synthesize money based on their deposits, and then they're authorized to credit to their customers dollars that really aren't there. They're synthetic dollars. That's how I would describe it. Anyway, that's what I learned in corporate law, and that was very interesting and told me a lot about our country's insanity and the unconstitutional of our money, because the federal government's only ability to create currency is to mint dollars and gold and silver. That's all it says in the Constitution. But nobody wants to actually use the Constitution to correct it. So we are living in an unconstitutional monetary system. And by the way, when did this begin? It began under Lincoln when we had an emergency. We had to fight a war against the South, and we had to create a way of paying people off without using gold, because transporting gold in during the war was very dangerous, and people would rob the gold shipments and all this stuff. So they used the greenback, and that's how we got out of it. So it's a convenience, but if you stay in that system and you don't get rid of it, you have this problem we're facing today, and we'll get into that. So let's listen to what God says is what is a nation's obligation. And you'll say, well, why are you telling me about this, Doug? Because the very, very fundamental thing you have to do is, if your nation is sinning in this sense, is you can't, as a single person, change anything, right? It's not going to change. What you need to do is then defend yourself from what that is, because God is saying you will reap what you sow. We are going to reap at some point in time what we have been sowing for so many years. How will you recoup? And I know the answer everybody gives you is gold and silver, but there's a reason. There's a reason for that. And there's easy ways to access that. There's actually ETFs now, electronic traded funds, and other funds like CEF that actually hold physical gold for you in their accounts in Canada. If you buy their stock, I think it's like $1,800 for 100 shares of that. And then you get basically gold or silver in the amounts it holds, and it holds 50-50. It tries to hold a ratio of 50-50. Anyway, I'm not here to sell gold. I'm here to tell you this is the sin that we have committed in this next verse. It's right here, Deuteronomy 28:12. Yahweh will open to you his good treasure in the sky to give the rain of your land in its season and to bless all the work of your hand. You will lend to many nations and you will not borrow. That's what Israel was commanded to do. No borrowing, not a dime. Lend, but do not borrow. We are borrowing from foreign countries. I can't even tell you the amount of money, but it's a huge sum. It's over $34 trillion. And we get the money from foreign countries. We are owned technically by every foreign country in the world. And but that's another thing. So how do we defend from this? And what can we pray about? And what can we learn? What the Bible teaches about what our nation does, it allows us to look about it at a little bit objectively. Instead, when we have to now turn it about at ourselves, God doesn't like us to borrow money. He doesn't prohibit individuals from borrowing money. Just, in fact, it's allowed, but with this concept, every 7 years, debts have to be canceled no matter what. So nobody would ever loan you money that would not be paid off within 7 years of debt service, or debt servitude, they called it in the Bible. Nobody would loan you money that wouldn't be paid off by your labor in 7 years, because it's going to be discharged on the seventh year, each cycle of 7 years in the Bible. So that's a whole nother issue of like, when can you borrow money? But under the Bible, that depended upon having a bankruptcy discharge every 7 years automatically by law. So we have to then readjust ourselves and say, okay, then in a nation where we can electively bankrupt ourselves every 7 years, what can we do? Should we do borrowing, and how much should we borrow, or should we not borrow at all? I think the ideal is to not borrow anything, or at least borrow it at a low rate of interest. We'll get to that. Anyway, let's listen to this fun book by Deron Davis. He's talking about the national economic sins according to the Bible, and this is a book review I did in 2012. And I said, in a new twist on the message of Goethe's famous play Faust, and it's fun book about how paper money was being introduced into Germany, and he made a nice, funny play about it, and how it's so seductive and will lead the country to destruction eventually. Wrote this book in 2012. He has released a non-political book entitled Obama's Prophet. So there's nothing political at all about it. He's not attacking Obama or anything like that. He's trying to actually say what he is dreaming would be a wonderful thing is if Hosea the prophet comes back and tells Obama the secrets of God's word about financial management of a nation's debt or its economic ability to continue. And it used to be sold. It is sold still at Amazon, and it's $29.99. I think it is in a paperback, and so you can buy it there. There's no Kindle version of it, unfortunately. But I'm going to tell you enough of it that may intrigue you, and it's probably a good read even for children when I read it at one point. This fictional tale is laced with good-natured humor, which surrounds the premise that Obama has sought out the old prophet Hosea, living now in Israel, for advice. In the spirit of Goethe's message in Faust, Hosea will warn us of the deal we have made with the devil by debasing our currency with paper money and other economic ills. Excuse me. Yes, that means Hosea is a Methuselah and then some, but we are asked to suspend disbelief. You are gripped from the beginning by the storytelling long before you know where this story leads. The good humor and common sense of the author, Duran Davis, invites you ever onward. This book is so well written in simple English and so informative, it would be ideal for parents to give their children to read. It will entertain and inform. I learned dozens of things I never knew before and the meaning of scripture I never deeply contemplated. Duran does it for us, all in 182 easy-to-read pages. It starts with Obama asking Israel to send their top economic expert to give a biblical perspective on the nation's ills, the ills in the United States. This was an effort at hearing both sides. Hosea is chosen and arrives in Washington by an LL flight rather than a cloud. After all, our media sensationalizes that this prophet had married a prostitute. Remember, that's the story of Hosea. Hosea gives a speech to Congress that diffused that issue. It was all in God's plan to exemplify the sin of Israel, to have a wife who takes lovers regularly, but whom God takes back if the wife says, "I'm sorry," and recommits her love. The media was disappointed that this story had no legs. Then Duran reminds the nation of its moral rot, its relativism, its belief now that the wealth it obtained was by its own hands rather than God's blessings. But Duran, whose bio on the back cover says he has advocated a nationalization of the Federal Reserve and a return to a constitutional currency, has a novel message that national economics is something God cares about. So now I had two reasons to continue reading: the humor and my lack of familiarity with how the Bible might speak about national economics. In the end, I learned a lot about Bible passages that I did not even realize dealt with economic sin issues. Thankfully, Duran takes it slow. He does not overwhelm. He mentions Hosea wrote about the nation of Israel being scolded for having cheated the poor by what? False weights and measures. Hosea 12, verse 7, which Duran Davis discusses on page 21. I began to wonder, did that have anything to do with debasing precious metal currency, reducing its weight by using a scale that did not reveal the weight change? If so, that would be an ancient form of inflation that I did not see before in Holy Scripture. I'm going to pause there. So I actually, in college, I did a paper on how Rome debased its currency by taking gold and silver coins and starting to mix it with impure metals, more like tin and copper, and it would have no longer 100% purity, and they would change the purity gradually over time. And that was a hidden inflation that people didn't realize it because the coin looked the same and had similar appearance of what's imprinted on it and had the same designation. If it's a denarius, it was one denarius, even though now it didn't have the same amount of gold or silver, depending on the coin itself. So inflation and debasement of currency is possible even with gold and silver, just so you know. The intrigue mounts. Duran then says Micah in the Bible scolded his nation as a whole, for there was, quote, no end of getting rich by cheating the poor. That's in Micah chapter 6, verse 20. Duran comments, quote, how? By lying scales of false money. Davis, Obama's prophet, 2012 at page 25. Hosea tells Congress, this is the prophet Hosea who was living in Israel, took the plane flight to the United States. He then tells Congress of the United States bluntly that likewise our nation is guilty of, quote, deceptive money, confiscatory taxation, and that by inflation you have taken the people's money and enslaved them with debt. It at page 15. So what he's saying there is what we don't realize is when everybody says, oh, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that, we're borrowing money to do this. We don't have tax revenue that covers any of it by tens of trillions of dollars. I mean, we're up at $34 trillion deficit. So we don't have any money to buy anything new. We have no money to increase anything. Well, what are we doing? We're inflating our currency. Then what is the tax that we're being taxed with? Oh, we're being taxed by the devaluation of our money on a regular basis. I'm going to play for you a clip later that 86% of our currency's value from 50 years ago has been disappeared. 86%. So that dollar you earned, when you were a young person is, if it keeps at this pace, it's only worth 14 cents of what you earned 50 years ago. Instead of appreciating in value by investing and putting it away or whatever it could have been, it's worth 14 cents compared to the dollar you earned in 50 years ago. But I digress. Let's continue reading. And so he tells Congress, Duran says, Hosea tells Congress bluntly that likewise our nation is guilty of deceptive money, confiscatory taxation, and that by inflation you've taken the people's money and enslaved them with debt. Duran adds that Jesus taught, quote, you cannot serve God and mammon. Can that be a reference to such a sin as debasing a currency? Another intriguing thought. For the one who steals from the poor by inflating the little money they can save is putting mammon before godly principles. So in other words, whatever our scheme of attracting people to vote for us or vote for the other party or whatever it is, to be monetarily irresponsible by inflating currency, by using paper money, that ultimately, if you don't pay it back promptly, it's only going to get worse and worse. And the disaster that will come from this will be it's almost unthinkable. And people would end up begging in the streets. And this happened to Germany just before Hitler. So in 1923, their economy completely collapsed due to high inflation due to this type of solution that the government had been using in Germany. And that leads to what you get is somebody like Hitler later says, I'll solve everything, the iron fist. So you've got to realize there's always a negative consequence to irresponsible, unconstitutional, in this case, unconstitutional practice of creating currency that you're not allowed to make. It's only to be gold and silver. And on top of it, creating private banks that can synthesize money by virtue of authorization to banks to take in deposits that then are multiplied by law into 6 times whatever that bank receives in deposits. But I digress. Let's continue. Can that be a reference to such a sin as debasing a currency? Another intriguing thought. For the one who steals from the poor by inflating the little money they can save is putting mammon before godly principles. Duran leaves a very clear impression that inflation is the silent thief. I will throw in my 2 cents here. Inflation is due to the amount of paper currency added into a debt-based monetary system. Then consider our currency has not increased of late merely by 20 to 30%. I'm writing this in 2012, by the way. It's much worse now. Rather, as explained in a recent article, Inflation, the Silent Thief, in 2012, it read, quote, according to the St. Louis Federal Reserve, the United States money supply has increased by almost 300% since 2008. So in 4 years, the U.S. had inflated its currency, not by one time, 100%, not by 200%, but by 300%. That is unsustainable growth. And we're way past this now. We're like it's just unbelievable where we are now compared to where we were then. Significant inflation is inevitable. I'm saying this in 2012. Here we are in 2023. And we are really, really experiencing heavy inflation now, by the way. And we'll get into that in a minute. Only deflationary pressures like high unemployment and a slow economy mask the impact of such an expansion of the money supply, period. So if you didn't know this, and us dumb people who just are, going to work, doing our jobs every day, these smarty pants guys, they who, like Powell and people at the Federal Reserve, they know that by raising interest rates, which makes it harder for your business that employs you to hire you, because the cost of money is so much more expensive. So we've raised interest rates in the last year and a half from close to 1.5% to now it's near 5.25%. As interbank interest rates and money market, therefore, payments are in this high range, that means that your employer can't hire you anymore. It's his or her expenses have now radically gone up 4 times in the cost of money, at least at even the most lowest level. And that also has a ripple effect into credit card debt and so on and so forth. So literally, the way the government masks the fact that we have inflation is they try to create deflation by getting you fired. Because now when you don't have money, you're no longer spending money. You're no longer part of the problem. Spending money creates the money circulating. So we want to take money out of circulation, create a deflationary pressure. We fire people. That's literally what the government is doing by increasing interest rates. And they just hope that you don't know. They hope that you don't realize it, what they're doing. So I say, wait for it. My view, that's what I'm saying. My view is that's why they do these things. Okay. And thus Hosea and Duran's Obama's prophet is giving a warning, not unlike Goethe's work Faust. This play of Faust, this very interesting play, similarly fictionalized about an emperor whose treasurer reports that their, quote, coffers are still empty. The emperor makes a deal with the devil, Mephistopheles to issue paper money out of nothing. The ease of making money beguiles the king, but in return, the system eventually enslaves the masses to the devil. This Mephistopheles. This is a poetically explained in part 2 of the story where the devil Mephistopheles asks the emperor to sign a piece of paper to authorize paper money. So finally, the emperor says, "Yeah, I'll do whatever it takes. What do I have to do, devil?" And he says, "Just sign this paper. We can make paper money." Then the devil instructs the attendees of a mass ball that they can use the crown's paper money to, quote, drown their desires with love and wine. Goethe, by the end, points out that the devil's paper money breeds inflation, destroying the property and souls of the nation. And this is an article called The Devil and Jens Weidmann, Bloomberg Business Week, September 19, 2012. But I digress. This is my article from 2012. So I did have that expression down pat by 2012. But I digress. Continuing, it is interesting that Duran defines mammon as money and then claims, quote, it is a system of economics providing Satan a way to control this planet and its occupants. So in other words, the Bible doesn't really believe in money in the sense we believe in, meaning it believes it's gold and silver. It has to be real things and things that have value that the world accepts as exchangeable value by in and of itself, not by simply somebody saying, well, this is worth so much of gold or so much of this. It's itself contains its own value. It is, so here's what I say. It is so what is mammon? What is money making currency? It is all money or a system of money that has this weakness. Its weakness of putting us under control or being controlled by others through currency. Duran sends out intriguing hints of more yet to come. But there is a lot of poignant human moments and humor along the way to keep you reading to see what next Duran can do to make this story exciting. Oh, and then Duran himself enters the story as someone recommended to Jose to bring along to his meetings with Obama. Now we can hear information from Duran himself. In a moment of autobiography, Duran tells us that he studied under, quote, gold standard Professor Lawrence Lautenbach. He writes that at page 30. Incidentally, this led me to pull up an old article quoting Professor Lautenbach from 1968. I will excerpt the article at the end so you can see Lautenbach's point of view about war, raising taxes, etc. It appears Lautenbach was also a prophet with a small p. Duran has taken his Christian professor's themes and woven them into a compelling story in the mouth of Isaiah, calling for national economic righteousness toward money itself. It is great to see Duran's loyalty to his old professor by using Obama's prophet to draw attention to virtually prophetic insights taught by Lautenbach almost 40 years ago. And that was 20 some odd years prior to today. I wrote that. So that's now 60 years ago. Next, Duran makes us wonder, will we end up like Israel, taken into bondage by Babylon? In fact, Duran makes us wonder if it has already happened. Has the USA itself become Babylon? Duran suggests the answer as his prophet Hosea connects the dots that the USA, like Mystery Babylon in Revelation, has become a, quote, purveyor of immorality and war, page 23. Pause there. So that's another problem when you are become a debt country like this. How did Germany get itself out of its crisis of overinflation? It went to war. You literally have to drive the people to create things for war. So because creating production and factories and all that requires investment, but you can put a lot of people to work if you're willing to say, build me a tank, build me a submarine, build me this, build me a bomb. So literally the way out of a collapse is to get your country mobilized for war. And even while you're collapsing, we right now in the United States are collapsing. We don't see it. And going to war with Ukraine or going to war now in Israel or going to war against China over Taiwan, we'll make a war wherever we can because we have to sustain the military industrial complex, which is the only way. We don't care about being productive. We don't care about making widgets. We don't care about making toys for kids around the world and selling things. That's what China does. But we are so lost in our debt service and creating debt and just wanting everything now, not saving a dime, not paying off this debt. It's just looming. And now we pay $1 trillion of interest a year. That's what it is, ladies and gentlemen. It used to be like $10 billion when I was in the 90s. It was very small. Now it's $1 trillion a year that we have to service our own debt that we owe the Federal Reserve. And just so you know, does that not prove to you it's not really a private company? I mean, excuse me, it's not really a public company. It's a private entity. It was set up to be private so that we would owe it the money. we can't just tell it, we don't want to pay you because they have a constitutional right. The Federal Reserve is an entity that has every right like anybody else. You can't cancel its debt like that. You can't cancel student debt. You can't cancel this Federal Reserve debt because we created an entity, a corporate entity, and it's entitled to rights just like anybody else. So when people try to tell you, no, it's really quasi-public, wait a minute. Then why did we set it up as a private entity that has duties to the public created by statute? That's all it is. It's a statutorily influenced or guided and mandate, and it has mandatory things. It has to adjust things to the benefit of the United States. It has to do the best it can, but it's not part of the government, and therefore it cannot mandate anything. It can only do certain things like raise interest rates, whatever it can do in its own power to affect and help us. And that's what it's mandated to do, try to help us. But it can't help us if we're sick, if we're spending money way above our means. And I'm going to show you a clip from Powell when back in 2019, where he explains this is an unsustainable path. He's trying to do what he, as a Federal Reserve, has to do. He has to tell you, we're going in a crazy direction, and you're going to jeopardize our ability to get paid on all these debts you've incurred with us. The 30 trillion then, or it was 28 trillion, I think then, of debt. He's trying to say, I want to get paid. I'm working at the Federal Reserve. We want to get our money back, and you're going in an unsustainable path where you're going to run out of money. The people won't pay it. And the interest is going to inflate out of existence, and your tax revenue isn't paying anywhere close to anything you need to pay. That's what he warned us in 2019, and I'm going to play you that clip in a little bit. Once Duran inserts himself as an advisor into the story, he can now recount his briefings to Hosea on secular history that bears on the prophet's message. Duran gives his view of the famine and Joseph's dealing as having implications on God's principles. Interestingly, Duran in novel fashion sees that some kind of inflation is identified in the Bible. I must confess I never saw it before. It is in Genesis 47, verses 13 to 15. It says, quote, the money failed for the Egyptians so that they had to turn to Joseph for help. See Obama's Prophet at page 35. For money, the pharaohs used scarabs, it turns out, round pieces of stone or clay with the image of a little scarab beetle, useful in agriculture. And if you look over here on the right, that's a scarab and little beetles on there. And it was admired. People loved this beetle for some reason. And it was useful in agriculture, I should say there. The image of a little scarab beetle useful in agriculture. The Bible implies other nations lost interest in trading wheat for a rock merely because it had an image of an admired beetle. They're saying your little scarab means nothing to us. Give us gold, give us silver, or we won't give you our wheat. Perhaps Jesus alluded to this when he said, who among you would give a stone to your son when he asked you for bread? So these little rocks or stones or whatever, why would you give them that? Here's a piece of wood, here's a piece of stone when they want bread. No, you have to give them something of value. That's not going to get them the food they need. In Joseph's day, who would take a scarab rock in exchange for a piece of bread they owned? And this was known as scarabs. There was an article called Scarabs from Amenophis III, if you want to look that up. Moving on. So when the money failed, when people in or out of Egypt refused to accept these round stones with the beetle image on it, no one could buy food from other food suppliers. The value of the money fell like a stone, figuratively and in reality. I never knew this before. Then Duran notes why the family of Joseph living in Goshen survived. They were under Yahweh's authority, which was in their son Joseph, even though the brothers thought they had killed him. But the story illustrates the outcome of those who rely upon godly principles. Joseph, as a master who saved in time of plenty, versus everyone else who was enslaved to the inherently worthless monetary system of the pharaoh. I love Duran's depiction of Obama's reaction to learning about this. Just then, President Obama spoke up. I've never heard of this mentioned before. I mean, in all the years I listened to Reverend Wright, it's a spectacular comparison. Same famine, same place, two masters, two strikingly different outcomes. Page 38. Duran is witty, fun, and educational all at the same time. Then Duran tells us in Nehemiah chapter 4 and 5 about God's displeasure of a nation becoming a debtor to another nation, causing them to be mocked. There's a lot more detail on page 40. Duran relates that in Nehemiah 9, verse 34, exist more parallels to the USA system today. Duran then gives an example of the paper money system of Kublai Khan, which Marco Polo saw firsthand. When it collapsed, it led to a depression in China that lasted 100 years, page 44. I will stop there. Every page is filled with so much interesting information that you have never heard before, and it is presented in an educational and humorous way. The book ends in an exultation of anticipation of our coming Lord on clouds of heaven. So it ends with ends great too. I think this would be a great book for young and old, either for evening reading or to examine the Bible in a Bible study group. All right, so now I'm going to play a clip from Powell from 2019 giving testimony in front of Congress, and they're asking what are you going to be able to do, and is this debt become unsustainable? This is 2019. This is 4 years ago. Let's listen.
I will say that, and as I said in my statement, that the U.S. federal government is on an unsustainable fiscal path, by which is meant that that debt as a percentage of GDP is growing, and now growing sharply, growing quickly, faster, and that is unsustainable by definition. We need to stabilize debt to GDP. The timing of doing that, the ways of doing it, through revenue, through spending, all of those things are not for the Fed to decide.
But as perhaps, for lack of a better term, one of the chief economists in the nation, to be able to give advice to the folks that are out there, to the country as a whole, about the things that we have in our future and about the threats to our future. Social Security will go bankrupt unless we start managing it. Is that a fair statement?
Well,
on the current trajectory?
I think, if I could say it this way, I think what happens over time is that we wind up spending more and more of our precious revenues to service the debt, to pay interest to people who own the debt, as opposed to investing in the things that we really need, education, all the things that we need to be investing in so that we can compete in the global economy.
So that screen you saw from September 2023, just a month ago, shows our national debt is $33 trillion. Debt per person, $98,000. When you're born or you're a child, you now owe $98,000. You haven't even earned a penny yet. From us, so someone who follows Yahweh, follows the Lord, there's only one solution. Go back to the real money that exists. It's also the Constitution of the United States that provides the only true money. The currency that the Congress was allowed to make was silver and gold. And one day, this is what they're going to have to do to restore economic sanity. All of the money that we were all holding will probably become valueless at some point. And it may not happen in my lifetime, but it may happen in your lifetime if many of you are young. And this happened to pre-Nazi Germany. They literally had wheelbarrows that were carrying around marks, and they eventually had to cancel that currency and issue a whole new currency. And everybody started from zero. Everybody had to start working all over again to earn all their money. If you want to have anything left, and if such a purge actually happens to get rid of this, we have to default and take a default against the Federal Reserve, and they can collect and take all our assets and distribute it to all their investors, because it's a bank with investors. Anyway, so it's the stock I recommend if you can get a brokerage account. Even I think Robinhood, you don't really need any significant deposit to get it going. You got $180, you can buy 10 shares of CEF, and now you have $180 of silver and gold, and they own exactly silver and gold 100% to back up this stock price. So their price tracks the price of gold. So just to see the effects of inflation since 2020, you can see its price of CF was around $4 or $5, and now it's around 18. If you do the math, it's 387% increase, and that's all coming from inflation. Okay, so you're almost guaranteed that until this all collapses, this house of cards collapses, your investment in gold will accelerate. But the real thing is whatever currency replaces the current currency, and I've talked about the ideas they have to replace our currency, but that's a whole nother thing. Whatever that happens, you will always get silver and gold in the same measurement of value, because that's how it works. It has an intrinsic. Many people think, oh, silver and gold doesn't have any intrinsic value. Well, it does. Everybody knows that. It has an intrinsic value for trading. So when God says something, it's just true. Even though you say, well, it's just a stone, it's just a piece of metal. No, it's beautiful. and it's can be made into high-tech things. Both silver and gold are used in all kinds of high technology now. So it does have intrinsic value for economic reasons, but it also has intrinsic value as trade and commerce. Okay, so it's just my suggestion. Any of you who want to protect yourself, do a little bit of this, set aside, take $180 out each week of your or out of each paycheck and put it aside and buy 10 more shares, 10 more shares. You can do that. I mean, you may not be able to do that much longer with the inflation making all our goods cost more and more and more. And I understand that, and I'm dealing with the same thing. But we have to tighten our belts, put something away, so that if in case disaster strikes, you will have something when the dust settles. All right. Well, God bless everybody. Take care. Ciao. Bye.